It was my grandmother's brooch that I noticed first, not the woman sitting next to my husband at the table we had reserved together, not the champagne flutes already filled, or the way he didn't stand up when I walked in. It was the small oval brooch pinned to the woman's blouse, navy blue with a cluster of seed pearls around a single pale amethyst, and I recognized it the same way you recognize your own heartbeat, without thinking, without needing to look twice. My grandmother wore that brooch every Sunday to church for 43 years. I stood in the doorway of Hargrove's, one of those old money steakhouses in downtown Columbus that my husband loved because it made him feel established, and I just stopped. The hostess almost walked into me. I apologized to her. That's the thing I remember most clearly from that moment. I apologized to the hostess. My name is Joanna. I'm 38 years old. I was married for 9 years to a man I'll call my husband because that's what he was, legally, on the night this happened, even though he had apparently decided otherwise sometime before. I should back up. My grandmother passed in March, 8 months before that dinner. She left me a few things: her china, a cedar chest, a small savings bond, and her jewelry box. Nothing valuable by any market standard. Everything valuable by every standard that actually matters. The brooch had been hers since before my mother was born. She wore it to her own wedding. She wore it when she brought my mother home from the hospital. She wore it to my college graduation, holding my arm in every photo, beaming like I had personally hung the moon. When she passed, I took the jewelry box home and put it in the top drawer of my dresser. I didn't go through it for weeks. I couldn't. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest. My husband and I had been struggling for about 2 years, the way couples sometimes do when they stop being curious about each other and start being just roommates who share a mortgage. We were in couples therapy briefly. We stopped going. He said it wasn't helping. What I didn't know then was that it wasn't helping because he had already decided where he was going. He just hadn't told me yet. He traveled for work. He's in commercial real estate, long weekends in Charlotte, occasional weeks in Atlanta. I'm a physical therapist. I work Tuesday through Saturday. Our schedules rarely overlapped, and I had stopped noticing that they didn't. About 6 weeks before the dinner, my friend Liz called me. We'd been close since graduate school, the kind of friend who tells you things you don't want to hear because she loves you too much not to. She didn't lead with it. She asked how I was doing, asked about the holidays, and then she said, quietly, "Joe, I need to ask you something, and I need you to not get upset with me before I finish." She had seen my husband in Cincinnati. He doesn't work in Cincinnati. He was at a restaurant with a woman. They were not behaving like colleagues. I told her she must have been mistaken. She sent me a photo 20 minutes later. She had taken it from across the room, half hidden behind a menu, because she knew I would say that. I stared at it for a long time. The woman had her hand on top of his. He was smiling in a way I hadn't seen him smile in at least 3 years. I didn't confront him. I know that surprises people when I tell them. But here's the thing, I had seen enough in that photo to know that whatever I was walking into was not a mistake or a moment of weakness. That was comfort. That was familiarity. That was a relationship. So I waited, and I started paying attention. I'd checked our joint account and found charges I didn't recognize. A jewelry store in November, a hotel in October, a florist in September. I went through our filing cabinet one afternoon while he was at the gym, and I found something that stopped me cold. A manila envelope, tucked behind our insurance documents, with my name typed on the front. Inside was a set of divorce papers, dated 4 months earlier, with my signature on them. I sat on the floor of our home office for a very long time. I had never signed those papers. I had never seen those papers. I didn't even know a filing had been initiated. I pulled my phone out and photographed every single page. Then I put everything back exactly as I found it, went upstairs, washed my face, and called a lawyer. Her name is Renee. She is exactly the kind of attorney you want in your corner when you realize your life has been quietly dismantled around you. She told me, calmly and without drama, that what I was describing, a forged signature on a legal document, was a felony. She told me not to move money, not to change behavior, not to alert him in any way. She told me to document everything. I documented everything. For 6 weeks, I was a person I didn't entirely recognize. Methodical, quiet, careful. I went through the jewelry box. I made a list of every piece with photos and descriptions. The brooch was already gone. So was a small gold ring that had been my great-aunt's, and a pair of pearl earrings my mother had given my grandmother on her 60th birthday. I don't have words for what that felt like. Those weren't assets. Those were the physical evidence that the women in my family had existed and loved each other and passed something forward, and they were gone. Renee filed a motion to invalidate the divorce papers on the grounds of fraud. She also contacted a forensic document examiner. The signature apparently wasn't even a very good forgery. The dinner was his idea. He had suggested it 2 weeks earlier, very casually, over breakfast. Hargrove's New Year's Eve, a small celebration. Just the two of us, he said. We've been so disconnected. Let's do something nice. I said that sounded lovely. I did not tell him that I had spent the previous week sitting across from Renee and a fraud investigator. I did not tell him that I had a new account at a different bank. I did not tell him that Liz was going to be parked half a block from Hargrove's that night, just in case. I wore a black dress and my grandmother's garnet necklace, one of the pieces he hadn't gotten to yet. And I arrived at the restaurant at 7:58, 2 minutes before our reservation. He was already there. So was she. She was seated to his left at a 4-person table. There was a small arrangement of white flowers in the center. Not the restaurant's doing, I could tell. It had been placed deliberately. There was a bottle of champagne already open, and there was the brooch, pinned right below her collarbone, catching the candlelight. The hostess was still recovering from my sudden stop when my husband looked up and saw me. He had the specific expression of a man who has rehearsed something many times and is now discovering that rehearsal was insufficient. "Joe," he said, "sit down, please." I sat down. I set my clutch on the table. I looked at the woman. She was younger than me, not by as much as I had expected. She looked uncomfortable in a way that told me she hadn't been fully briefed on what this evening was supposed to accomplish. "I need to tell you something," my husband said. I said nothing. I know there's no good way to do this." He reached across the table toward my hand. I moved my hand to my lap. "The divorce has been finalized. Legally. I should have told you sooner, and I'm sorry for that. But I wanted you to meet. I want you to know that I've found someone and you're engaged," I said. He blinked. "Yes. And you believe the divorce is finalized?" "It is finalized." I looked at him for a moment. Then I looked at the brooch. "Where did you get that?" I asked the woman. My voice was very steady. I was proud of that. She looked confused. She looked at him. "It was a gift," she said carefully. "It belonged to my grandmother," I said. "She wore it to her own wedding in 1967. It's been in my family since before my mother was born, and it was in my jewelry box 6 weeks ago." The table got very quiet. "Joe," he started. "Don't." I picked up my phone. Not dramatically. Just picked it up, the way you do when you're checking the time. "I've been working with an attorney since November. The divorce papers you filed, the ones with my signature on them, have been submitted to a forensic examiner. They've been flagged as fraudulent. A motion to invalidate was filed 3 weeks ago, which means legally we are still married." I paused. "You are not engaged. You are a married man at a restaurant with someone who is wearing jewelry he stole from his wife." His face did something complicated. "Additionally," I said, "I have documentation of 14 separate financial transactions over the past 11 months that my attorney believes constitute marital asset dissipation. The jewelry store charge in November, for example. I have the receipt. I know what was purchased." I stood up. I put my phone back in my clutch. "Renee will be in touch," I said. "Happy New Year." I walked out of Hargrove's at 8:04. 6 minutes. Liz was waiting in her car around the corner, and when I got in, I just sat there for a second, and then I started laughing, which turned into crying, which turned back into laughing. She handed me a gas station hot chocolate and didn't say a word, just drove. The weeks after that were not easy. I want to be honest about that, Because I think when people hear stories like this, they sometimes imagine that the satisfying moment at the restaurant is the end of it. It's not. There are lawyers and depositions and asset negotiations and a house you've lived in for 7 years that suddenly has a question mark over it. There are mornings when you wake up and feel completely hollowed out, not because you miss him. I'm not sure I did, not really, but because you miss the version of your life you thought you were building. That grief is real even when it's complicated. Renee was extraordinary. The forged signature case moved separately from the divorce proceedings. I won't detail all of it, but the financial fraud alone resulted in consequences that felt, finally, proportionate. The jewelry, the brooch, the ring, the earrings, was returned. I held the brooch for a long time when I got it back, just sat with it. My mother drove up from Cincinnati the weekend after the settlement. We sat at my kitchen table and she put the brooch in my hand and she said, "Mom would have loved this story." And she was right. My grandmother was a very practical woman who had a deep appreciation for things working out the way they were supposed to. I live in a different apartment now, smaller, closer to work, full of light in the mornings. Liz and I have standing Sunday brunch. I'm taking a ceramics class on Thursday evenings, which I mention only because I genuinely love it, and it surprises me every week that I do. I kept the garnet necklace on all night, through dinner and the car and the crying and the laughing. I'm wearing it right now, actually, as I write this. Some things you hold on to, some things hold on to you back. People ask me sometimes if I regret not confronting him sooner. Not screaming in that restaurant, not throwing the champagne, not doing any of the things I imagined doing in the weeks between finding those forged papers and walking into Hargrove's that night. I don't, and it took me a while to understand why. There's something I've come to believe, not because anyone taught it to me, not from a book or a sermon, but just from living through it and sitting with it afterward. What we do in our worst moments follows us. It shapes what comes next in ways we don't always see right away. My husband spent almost a year building something on a foundation of lies, forged signatures, stolen jewelry, a woman who didn't fully know what she was walking into. He wasn't careless, he was calculated. And that calculation, that sustained and deliberate choice to deceive, is what made everything that followed not just possible, but inevitable. You cannot build a real life on something fake. Eventually, the document examiner calls. Eventually, Renee files the motion. Eventually, you are sitting in a steakhouse on New Year's Eve and the woman you defrauded walks in wearing her grandmother's garnet necklace and already knowing everything. I think about Joanna from 2 years ago, the one who was calling Liz back saying you must have been mistaken. I understand her. She wanted the simpler version of events to be true. We all do. But I also think the version of me who waited, who paid attention, who called a lawyer instead of sending an angry text at midnight. That version was the one who came out of this with her grandmother's brooch back in her hands and her name on a settlement that was fair. Patience isn't passivity. That's the thing I want to say most clearly because I think they get confused. Waiting those 6 weeks wasn't weakness. It was the hardest and most active thing I've ever done. Every morning I woke up and chose not to blow the whole thing up before I was ready. That took more out of me than any argument ever would have. And the brooch, I keep coming back to that. Because what he took wasn't just an object, it was continuity. It was proof that my grandmother had existed, that she had loved people, that she had passed something forward deliberately. Trying to sever me from that was maybe the cruelest part of all of it. And the fact that I got it back feels significant in a way I don't have tidy language for. Some losses are reversible. Some things you think are gone turn out to just be temporarily held by the wrong person. Liz drove me home that night and didn't ask me how I was feeling, which was exactly right. My mom came up the following weekend and we sat at my kitchen table with tea and the jewelry box between us. She held the brooch for a long time before she gave it back to me. I'm not the same person I was before any of this happened. I don't think I'd want to be. The woman I was before was trusting in a way that made her easy to deceive. The woman I am now is trusting in a way that is chosen, slower, clearer, harder to fake out. That feels like something. That feels like the thing worth keeping.